Hello, health champions. Today I want to talk about the coronavirus, COVID-19, the death rates, and the associated risk factors. But more importantly, I want to talk about what can we learn from these numbers and what do they mean to you. By the end of this video, you will have a completely new understanding of what the immune system is and the difference it can make in the fight against the coronavirus. Coming right up. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Early on, the death rates for the coronavirus had been estimated between 3 and 4%. And that was from a study of about 50,000 people out of China after their situation had stabilized once they had some experience to draw from. Later on, they have estimated now, the last number I saw was that it's around 1.4%, but some researchers suggest that it's actually a lot lower than that because there are so many people who have a mild infection or who may be asymptomatic that never gets entered into the statistics because the authorities never find out about them. So some researchers say it might be as low as 0.5%. But the number isn't really that important. We just want to start relating the numbers and understand what does the range mean. And we also want to keep in mind that statistics are the numbers around all of this, but it's people who are suffering and dying. And even one person who dies unnecessarily from neglect or ignorance is a tragedy. So we do know that age and cardiovascular disease and diabetes and so forth, they are risk factors that will increase the death rate. So then people think that, oh well, if I don't have any of these, if I'm young and reasonably healthy, then there is no risk. Well, that's not true because even though your risk might be low, it's never zero. So we all need to be careful and we all need to play our part in this. Believe it or not, the first risk factor is gender. So if you are male, you are more at risk because women are healthier in general. 2.8% of men versus 1.7% of women died in this study out of China. And if we average those, then we get a little over 2%, which is the death rate that came out of that study. Now, the next thing that we've heard a lot about is age, that the older people are much more at risk. So for people over 80 years old, the death rate was 14.8%, almost 15%. And then the younger you get, the less risk there is. So between 70 and 80, the risk is 8%. Between 60 and 70, 3.6. Between 50 and 60, 1.3. And once you get down to 40 to 49 years old, the risk is only 0.4%. And then it drops slightly from there, and it's 0.2% down till people under 10 years old. And the percentage is zero, even though I did hear that a young girl died who was under the age of 10. And when we look at the average, then we use the same average of just over 2% that we got from all the total of the men and the women. So as we can see, there is an enormous difference between the old and the young. It goes from being extremely risky to hardly any risk at all. Then we want to look at the risk by underlying condition, the death rate by underlying condition. And for people who had cardiovascular disease, the death rate was 10.5. Diabetes, 7.3. Chronic respiratory disease was 6.3. Hypertension was 6%. Cancer, 5.6. And if they had no known underlying condition, their risk was 0.9%. And again, the average a little over 2. Now, we want to keep in mind here, though, that the 0.9% were people who had no documented underlying condition. And that didn't mean that they were perfectly healthy. And if we look at these conditions, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, these are primarily associated with insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. And we also know that people with insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome have more of just about every condition that there is. So most of these increased risks are due to metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. It's not the only factor, obviously, but it is the primary factor. And if we also weigh in the fact that if someone has diabetes, that they have a documented A1C of probably 6.5 or so or over, then they also include people who are on their way to insulin resistance. So it didn't mean that they were perfectly healthy. And we want to keep all of these things in mind as we move forward. So if we put these side by side, we can see that age for sure is the biggest risk factor. And again, you can't really do much about that. But cardiovascular disease has almost the same range, the same spread. So most of the risk factors are something that we can do something about. And we also want to keep in mind that it's not the age in itself that is the risk factor, but it's the fact that most of the elderly people also have some of the underlying conditions. So now if we compare the range, if we look at the 14.8% of 80 plus year olds versus 30 to 39 year olds, we have a 74 times, a 7,400% increased risk from being older. Then we also have to ask though, if almost 15% died, then what was it that helped 85% of them to live? And if we look at the risk factors, if we compare the cardiovascular disease versus those people who didn't have any underlying condition, now we see that there's a 1,166% difference, a 12 times difference. So what am I trying to show with these numbers, with these huge ranges? I'm simply trying to show that there is a difference. What is the difference between someone in this category and someone in this category? Because the virus is the same. Okay? The virus is the constant, it is opportunistic. The body and the immune system is the variable. So what is it about this one versus this one? And what is it about this one versus that one? So let's think about health. Let's think about vitality. Let's think about the body's resistance as a charged battery. If a battery is fully charged, it has a lot of capacity to do work, to do its intended purpose. But as the battery loses charge, it has less and less capacity, it has less and less reserves left to do what it's supposed to do. And then we want to contrast that with how much does the body have to do? How much work is there to be done? How many tasks and chores are there to solve? So as we age, we tend to lose charge on the batteries, but we also tend to increase the burden, the total charge, the total number of things to resolve and handle. So up here, we can call those resources or health or immune system or stamina or vitality or energy. All of these things that we know are associated with health, they are also your immune system, right? Your whole body is your immune system. And then these things down here, we want to think of them as the sum total of the body burden. What is burdening the body? What's the workload, right? So toxicity and infections increase the workload. Deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies. If the body has to have something and it doesn't get it, now you have a deficiency. The body can't perform the job at its best. If you have metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, diabetes, then you have a group of conditions also associated with cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And degeneration is another factor that is part of the stress on the body. As we age, we tend to decrease on the resources, and the longer we live, the more we tend to accumulate body burden and toxicity and deficiency and metabolic syndrome and degeneration. So some of the factors involved in this process are gender, like we talked about, but again, we can't do anything about that. Also, age is a factor that we also can't do anything about. However, there is something called biological age. So you could be 80 years old and be here, or you could be 80 years old and be here. And that's the choice that we have. Not necessarily in this moment, but in the long run, that's something that we can influence. Insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. Those are other factors that we have a lot of control over. Not in the short term, not in a matter of days, but in the matter of weeks and months, we have a tremendous amount of control. So if we put all this together, we can think of this as our energy, as our resources. And as we age, that decreases. But how fast it decreases, we have some influence over. And then we can think of the body burden as the red line that increases the longer we live, the more we accumulate. Then this green area would indicate your health reserve. So the higher the green bar is above the red bar, the more health reserves you have, the more resources you have to tackle challenges. And then over here, obviously, the red over the green would be a deficiency. That means it's a deficit. That's the degree to which you're vulnerable. And if we equate this to the death rate, then we would see that some people have a 0 point something death rate, maybe even 0.0 something, okay? No one is completely bulletproof, and we often have things that we don't know about, so we shouldn't take anything for granted. But if your body does its thing, then you have close to 0% death rate. If you have, on the other side of the spectrum, your death rate is close to 100%. There are some people who are pretty much doomed. They're so close, they're so feeble, they're so fragile that any little thing can knock them over. I heard someone say that the immune system had nothing to do with the coronavirus, that it's just going to run its course. And I don't know where they get such an understanding, because if the immune system had no role in this, then we would have either a 0% death rate or 100% death rate. There would be nothing in between. Either the virus would be so weak and feeble that it couldn't hurt us, and then we wouldn't need an immune system, or it would so overpower our bodies. It would just be so virulent that our immune system had no say in it, and then the death rate would be 100%. So that's ridiculous, okay? The range is 0 to 100, and everything in between depends on your body's ability to defend itself and defeat the virus. So here's the spectrum. Here's your health spectrum from best to worst. So what are some of the things that you can do to start moving? No matter where you are, you can always start moving in the right direction. So what are some of the things you can do? Well, nutrition. You can eat real food. Whole food, lots of fresh food that has real nutrition. You can take some supplements. If you don't get all of it from the food, you get some quality supplements for vitamins and minerals. Vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, good quality minerals. They all help support your body because that immune system, that body needs resources. You can make sure that you don't stress too much, that you get proper sleep. You can look for information that give you a little bit of hope instead of just despair. Instead of just looking at all the worst news, you can listen to something uplifting, or you can select some videos or some information that give you a more balanced view. You can go for a walk and get some fresh air. Obviously, you want to avoid the crowds, but there's plenty of places where you can go and not run into crowds. A moderate amount of exercise is a tremendous immune booster. doing some intermittent fasting to help your body clear out some of that sugar and some of that insulin resistance, and also allowing some autophagy to boost your immune system. So don't think of these as a quick fix. There is no quick fix for real health. But what do you have to lose? If you've never done anything serious about your health, you've been thinking about it, well, why not take this time right now? Just start, cut out the sugar, make some good decisions. And if you've never meditated before, go right today and start meditating. Find a guided meditation or just sit down and relax and think about something that makes you feel good. So no matter what your risk is, it's never zero. So do what you can to protect yourself. Follow the guidelines diligently, and for the next few weeks or months, make sure that you do everything that's recommended. You wash your hands and you wipe your surfaces and objects, and don't touch your face, avoid crowds, all of the good things. You've all heard those, so do it. But even more important than protecting yourself is to protect others. And the main thing about this pandemic is to contain it, to stop the spread. So do your best to stay at home. If you don't have to go out, then don't. Avoid crowds and avoid risk groups. So again, it's not just that you want to avoid sick people to not get it. You want to think, well, maybe I'm an asymptomatic carrier, and then you want to avoid meeting with elderly people. You want to avoid the other risk groups such as cardiovascular disease or cancer. So avoid sick people, more so not to give it to them if they have some other disease than corona. So I want you to take responsibility for this. Do your part. And remember that if you are super healthy, your biggest problem is that you may give it to someone else who is not. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you share it with as many people as you can, and then check out that one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.